Welcome to Bad Dog Agility, a podcast helping you reach all of your dog agility goals. Whether it's competing under the bright lights of the televised finals at Westminster or successfully navigating a homemade course in your own backyard, we'll bring you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
The show starts with your hosts, Jennifer, Esteban, and Sarah.
I'm Jennifer.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 353. Today's podcast is brought to you by St. Rocco's Treats.
It's Grace from Hounds of Hack. It's Amber from American Canine Country.
It's Cynthia from CH Dog Agility.
It's Lindsay from Y2 Canines. And we love using St. Rocco's Treats as our high
Value reward.
And you will too. Visit us at strocco'streats.shop and use the code BD30 for 30% off your first order. Enjoy the attention-grabbing flavor and easy-to-break texture that Grace, Amber, Cynthia, Lindsay, and so many others love about St. Rocco's Treats. Again, use the code BD30 for 30% off. Thank you.
And you can find a link to St. Rocco's Treats on the show notes page. A couple of weeks ago, Esteban and I had our Rice University reunion. We had some friends in from out of town, and we were out to eat, and we were talking about sports, and we were talking about the WNBA. And one of our good friends...
which is women's professional basketball here in the United States.
That's right. The women's professional basketball. And so one of the guys that we were talking with, we were talking about how both of us, Esteban and I, and our friend who lives in New York, had really gotten excited about Caitlyn Clark.
Yeah, so Joe and I played basketball together in college, and we played on the same intramural team, actually, when we were at Rice. And he made the point that Caitlyn Clark loves to take long threes and step back threes, very difficult shots. But basically, she doesn't sit right behind the three-point line. She sits several feet beyond the three-point line. So she's taking very deep threes. And I think she averages the longest distance per three of any player in the WNBA. And he said, and now you're going to walk around all the playgrounds and see all these kids, not just girls and boys, jacking up shots from deep. Basically, the game is different, right? The way the game is played is different. She's having this tremendous downstream impact on the sport, not just in the league itself, which will also change.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I thought was really interesting about how he described it was, he said, she's doing all these things that nobody's doing. And now other people are trying to emulate her, both, as you said, both kids, but also within the WNBA. Suddenly there are players that are taking shots that same player would not have taken a year ago.
That's right.
And maybe they can't make it at the same rate that Caitlyn Clark can, but they make some of them. And as they do, as they get closer, it elevates the entire game. And that was kind of the fundamental point, that there's somebody out there or some, trend that happens that kind of, it's almost like it unlocks permission in everybody else to really try something new and to go after it. Or I think another way of looking at it is other people suddenly see that what is possible and they shoot for something that is better or harder or higher than anybody else had before. And as they go for that, even if they don't, it's like that saying, right? If you shoot for the moon, even if you miss, you're still among the stars. If you're trying to do something harder than what you've done before, even if you don't achieve the ultimate, you end up progressing. And that was the part where I was like, okay, I see that in our sport, having been in it. And I think anybody I think time gives you that perspective, right? All of us on the podcast, I hesitate to say it because it sounds really crazy and makes me feel a little too old. But I think we have like over 60 years of experience of agility on this podcast, which is crazy. But when you have that kind of like long perspective on the sport, it lets you see how things really have changed and progressed in our sport. And a lot of it has to do with people kind of shooting for beyond what they thought previously was capable. And so we wanted to talk about kind of some of the ways that we've seen our sport change and how And I think that it's an important idea also because I think it shows how powerful it is to have to do things like watch the Agility World Championship, right? Be a spectator in your own sport. Being able to follow things like the National Agility Championship or the UKI Open on streaming, because it lets the entire group of competitors see what is possible. And the more you see what is possible, the more you shoot for a higher level of skill, different kinds of skills than you would have otherwise.
Yeah. I think a big part of what you mentioned is just kind of the growth and visibility or education within the sport. You know, back in the day, I'll age myself. Back in the day, if you wanted to learn something about agility, you had to drive to somebody who was perceived to be an expert, right? Like you were limited within somebody that you could drive to who could teach you something. There was no online classes. There was no YouTube where you could go and watch. There was no live stream of the World Championships. I mean, I have DVDs that Clean Run would sell of the Agility World Championships. And that was
Jen, wait, I have VHS that Clean Run would sell of the Agility World Championship.
I remember, you know, like I don't know if it was even my first one, but my second one after the Agility World Championships, you had to wait because, you know, they had to process it all, do it all. And then they would sell, like maybe the World Championships were in the fall, they'd maybe sell it around Christmas. Like you could buy, and I remember buying my first DVD set of the first World Championships I attended. And you're talking like now 3 or 4 months, right? Like now it's all instant, right? It's live streamed. You can watch it live. And even the information, I mean, if you're talking about an event more than 2 weeks after it, like that's old news, right? Like I mean, the World Championships was not that long ago. And if somebody brought it up, I'm like, we've had 3 major events since then. So the access to information, whether it's by choice in terms of you are going to learn and somebody's going to teach you this new tool, this new technique, or you're going to do it online, or just kind of learning through osmosis as you watch it. You're not necessarily conscious of what you're seeing or learning, but you're watching the live streams, you're watching the US Open, you're watching the Agility World Championships. I mean, that has done a complete 180 on the evolution of our sport and the way that we can access that information and make those changes.
Yeah, I think those are all really, really good points. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this topic in terms of 3 things: creativity, risk-taking, and influence. And I think Jen has basically touched on a lot of that right there. But when I think in agility of the first big change, and of course there were many, many changes, right? Especially anytime you have a new sport that you're inventing from scratch, there's going to be a lot of innovation, experimentation. But as far as training techniques, I'm going to go with the running dog walk. And the first time that I saw it was a French handler who I think won the world championship for the large size. This was a border collie. She had a big border collie. I want to say the dog's name was Mac. I'm not 100% sure. Do you know who I'm talking about, Jen? Christine, I think, Charpentier. And the dog would run off the dog walk, and they would have this devastatingly fast dog walk. Could not turn, though, right? So if there's a turn right after the dog walk, the dog would just shoot straight for like 10, 20 feet before they could turn, so they would always get a wide turn. And that's the first time I saw that, and I remember thinking, well, that's great as long as the obstacle is straight. And of course, judges over the next several years, almost as a reaction to the invention of the running contact, would create courses where they had sharp turns coming off of the contact to kind of equalize it for the non-running contact dogs, right? But that was so innovative that it actually forced judges and course design to respond to it, right? So in a sense, organizations were responding to this trend that was created by one handler. So one person took some kind of risk or had some creative thought or experiment that they did. And so this is not something that came from organizations, right? The organizations didn't say like, oh, well, we have a new piece of equipment and here's how to do it. And we want you all to do this. It was not driven by an organization, right? This was one person. And I'm not saying it was necessarily even her who was the first one. Probably there were many people in parallel experimenting with all different kinds of ways to do the dog walk faster, more efficiently, more reliably. Here in the United States, of course, the idea of stop contacts really took off because we valued the clean run, right? The qualifying run. And so we went kind of on a different evolutionary path. But I think it really speaks to risk taking. And I think other examples that I have from years beyond were backsides and even blind crosses. Imagine the first person who did a blind cross, and this assumes that there was an order in which crosses were used and discovered, right? So, Jen, what do you think? What do you think was the first cross ever done by a person in agility, probably by accident? And
I'm going to go, if I had to guess, I'm going to go with rear cross.
I think so.
Really?
Yeah,
I think so.
No, I was going to say rear cross because it's logical. You keep the dog in front of you.
Well, I don't think there was the obstacle independence initially to get ahead, right? Like, remember, all these people came from obedience and the dog was taught to be like at heel position. Like, I remember when I was learning the sport, if you could weave with your dog on your right, you were considered high level. Like, if you would go to a show and you could weave with your dog on your right, you're like, oh, they must be an instructor. They're high level.
I remember that.
I feel like rears, because you probably didn't have the independence to get far enough ahead to do like a front line. I don't know. I'm going to guess rear.
I like that. And I like to imagine that the first person who ever did a front cross did it quite accidentally, got completely lost, had no idea what obstacle was next, and was laughed at by all of her classmates. Right? And not knowing that was the first front cross ever done in dog agility. And then, of course, something similar with the blind crosses. And it's not just traditional blind crossing, between two jumps. I'm thinking about blind crosses that happen after backsides and other what I would call, quote unquote, specialty maneuvers, right, for different situations. So I think that there are always those risk takers who are looking for an edge. But related to that, and not quite the same thing, are those people who are just a little bit creative, right? Maybe they're not even the people who are out there like trying to win, but they're like, hey, what would happen if I did this, right? And so they tinker and they share their findings, and the way they share them is by getting out there and competing, right? And other people see their dogs and they think, that's interesting. Well, how did you do that? Can you show me? Right. And so I think that's kind of what starts the whole thing. And so I was just very, very interested and fascinated by the idea that you have an individual, and it's like throwing a rock in a lake, right? And then you have the ripple effects, but it's not driven by the organization.
Yeah, and I think another interesting aspect of this is that I feel like it's the kind of thing that you're only going to see in the rearview mirror, right? Like I think that it's a lot harder to see this happening in real time, that it's kind of a thing where when you look back, you realize, okay, I'm not sure exactly how we got here, but where we are now is very different than where we were before, Mm-hmm. And I think backsides are a great example of that, because I would say that here in the United States, at least, for our listeners. And I guess another problem is like sometimes it's hard for me to recognize how long I've been in the sport relative to other people, and to realize that a lot of people in the sport today have no notion of what it was like before. If you've only been in the sport for 5 years, this podcast might not make as much sense to you because you've been here kind of, I guess, in what I would call the modern era. But for those of us who have been around a long time, backsides used to essentially be considered, for the most part, an international element, that you would not see in one of your titling runs in the AKC, for example. And it wasn't until the addition of Premier, where the backside was one of the premier challenges, that kind of all agility competitors started treating backsides as something that they needed, and they needed to know, and they needed to teach. And now I would consider a backside to be all, one of the fundamental aspects of agility that all students would need.
So here's a really topical example. I would say, to follow up on Esteban's comment, I am neither creative nor a risk taker. I am neither of those things, but I am really good, at least I like to think I am, at studying agility, watching agility, and figuring out what everybody in all the different parts of the country and the world are doing. I spend a lot of time studying agility, seeing what people are doing and saying, I like that, I don't like that. Okay, that's what's coming in next. So with regard to backsides, I just had this conversation just last week. So less than 10 days ago with a student, that the current trend now on backsides is, and to go back a step, when backsides first came about, pretty much everybody picked one backside word, right? Back or around or push. And it was the same word for a backside curl as it was for a backside slice. Okay. Then there was, now we're going to have two backside words because now we're going to differentiate the jumping effort. So we're going to have one backside word for a backside curl and a different backside word for a backside slice. So even in my evolution, that is how my dogs are. Okay. So we're just talking backsides for a moment. B just has one backside word. Everybody under B, younger dogs, have multiple backside words, right?
Wait. So B is how old?
5. I know, right?
Right.
Okay,
so it's not like we're talking like your 12-year-old dog, right? She is in the prime of her thing, and she has one.
She has one. I'm debating the retrain, but the young ones, other than that, are 2. Well, now the thing is not having backside versus throttle, but rather having whether or not the dog is going to the right wing versus the left wing, and curl versus slice. So it won't matter if the dog is on your right or left. So it won't matter whether it's a backside curl or a throttle curl. If it is the right wing to a curl, that is one word, versus a left wing to a curl is a different word. And a slice on the right wing is a third word, and a slice on the right wing is a fourth word. I conceptually 100% get it. I am not willing to go down that rabbit hole yet.
Right.
So here's where somebody, and I theorize who I know started it. I'm not going to say their name in case I'm wrong because I don't want to offend anybody. I know who the first was to publicly come out that they were doing this. And since then, I have seen others give that person credit that they are now doing that. But they are trend setting. And right now I say, no way. I'm not doing it. Shelties aren't smart enough. What I'm doing is working. Don't fix what's not broken. And so now it's like, okay, in 5 years, will I do it? Right? Like now I got to come back to this podcast and say, like, I'm not a trendsetter. I'm not a risk taker. I own that. I'm good at following what everybody's doing and seeing if it's working. And if it's working, I'll hop on that bandwagon. And if it's not, I won't. But that is a very topical example of somebody who decided, you know what? I'm just going to do left wing, right wing. I'm not going to do curl, or I'm not going to do backside versus throttle. I'm just going to do it. It won't matter where I am. It won't matter if I'm on their left or right. If I need that particular wing, that's going to be one verbal and the other wing will be the other. And while it's a risk I'm not willing to take, I'm going to let them go. And for all we know, that is going to be where the future of the sport is in 20 years. We'll all be doing it that way. So we are just having this conversation about like, somebody taking the chance, taking the risk, taking the gamble, being creative in what they thought would make sense for their dog. And now we get to see where the sport goes.
Yeah, that is so interesting because it leads very nicely into the last thing that we're going to talk about on this podcast, which is what is today's trend. And I think what you're describing, Jen, is really part of a larger trend. And I think that trend is the dominance of verbal cues. Not just the kind of verbal cues where you're like, okay, the dog, follows a little bit of the body and a little bit of the verbal, and they put it all together in single, I think of it as a combination of parts that all come up to kind of one cue. We think of it as one cue. We don't really know what the dog is thinking. And I think that dogs are verbal in a way that they just weren't 10 years ago, even when we thought they were verbal. If that makes sense, right? Dogs and handlers right now today are doing really amazing things with verbal cues. And I think everything you just outlined falls into that category, right? Whereas people sometimes like me and Sarah, and maybe I shouldn't be speaking for you, some of the old timers were like, oh, I can't even get my left and my right correct. So I can't use left and right on course because the situation evolves so quickly. And if I'm facing the wrong way, I get confused about telling the dog to go left or right. And certainly we see that with lots of people. But verbal cues, extremely powerful. And it's so powerful because the dog can now be independent of your position and your emotion.
And guess what?
What?
Dogs are faster than people.
Ooh, that is a solid observation. But somebody thought, okay, I wonder what would happen if I could teach my dog to go take this backside and curl this way as opposed to that way. And I wonder if I can do it with 2 different verbal cues such that my body, I don't have to be standing in a particular place, facing a certain way, moving in a certain direction in order to get them to turn the correct way after this backside or this throttle, right? And as those people gain a competitive advantage, right, on course, then you're going to see more and more people trying to do that. And so in that sense, I think the courses and judges and organizations do have an impact kind of on, we're really talking about true evolution here, on selecting for some of these behaviors. Let's go back just very briefly to backsides, right? Backsides are backsides. And when it first came out, people are like, hey, I don't need backsides because they're not showing up in my courses. Well, guess what the organization did? Right here in the United States, AKC said, we're going to start putting backsides into things that you care about and you show up at, right? And they did this very carefully. So like you said, Sarah, they created separate classes so you could avoid them. But where could you not avoid backsides? You couldn't avoid them in the National Agility Championship in the final. So you work hard all year, qualify for nationals, you get your miraculous 3 straight clean runs, and boom, you're in the final. And guess what? There is a backside there. And they did it every single year for several years. There's one backside. Now, may have been an easier, quote unquote, easier backside, not a difficult backside, but people who refused to do backsides really struggled with that element on the course. And guess what? They decided, okay, look, it doesn't make sense to put in all this work, go to nationals, and then mess it up there in the final and look really bad. Even if I could get through it cleanly, I'm going to teach my dog backsides. And so that's different. There's a selective pressure from the organization, from course design, on whatever maneuver was invented, whatever thing is being done. And so for me, Jen, everything that you said, the question is going to be, are you going to get a competitive advantage? Or are 90% of the competitors who are doing that, maybe even a much higher number, just really going to mess up their dog's understanding of whatever? I think that's the fear of people like you and me that are sitting back and waiting. But even if 90% of the people mess up, like with running contacts, right? How many people have good running contacts? I would say a very small percent of people who try, and I say try for, I don't know, at least a month, several sessions to do a running contact. How many can see it all the way through to success? Maybe not many, but those people are dominating these standard runs, right? And so this may be a very small edge, but if it is an edge that gives a group of handlers a huge advantage, more wins, more titles, things like that, then you're going to see more and more people doing it. And that goes back to what Caitlyn Clark is doing, right? She is out there, she is jacking up these threes, but she is having a tremendous amount of success, and she is the best. And through that performance, she is redefining the game. She is redefining her sport. And we have those people in dog agility as well.
Absolutely. And, one last thing that I wanted to say is let's think about a multiverse in which Caitlyn Clark came into her rookie season, was jacking up threes, and just got completely shut down and annihilated. Right?
Oh, yeah.
The multiverse, right? She wasn't good. The multiverse that some people predicted was going to happen when she came up to the WNBA, and they're like, oh, she's about to see what real basketball is all about. She's not going to be able to do the things she could do in college, right? In that multiverse, if she's jacking up threes and she's not hitting them, or she's not hitting them at a rate that makes it worthwhile, lots of turnovers on all of her insane passes and things like that, then that selection doesn't happen, right? Then that behavior dies out in this kind of evolutionary idea that you have here. And so I think that is kind of an interesting aspect too, is that it really depends on the outcome. And so, when we talk about all of these, the creativity and the possibility, not all of them work out, right? Sometimes there are going to be things that people try. It doesn't give them advantage, and those things are not going to continue to be a part of the conversation of agility. But it's like you said, it's that risk taking that lets us go one way or the other, right? Let's get rid of that idea. Like, is 4 backside words here to stay, or is it a fad for a couple of years, it goes away? It's all going to depend on the outcome. Mm-hmm. So that's why, again, it's all in the rear view mirror when we look back and see what stayed and what was selected against in our sport of agility. And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors, St. Rocco's Treats and hititboard.com. Check out the Teeter Teach It, only at hititboard.com. The Teeter Teach It is an easy-to-use tool that controls the amount of tip on your teeter so you can introduce motion to your dog in a gradual way. Go to hititboard.com for the new Teeter Teach It and other training tools and toys. Use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hititboard.com. Happy training!
Thank you for listening to Bad Dog Agility. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information, updates, and links to all our socials, just check out our website, www.baddogagility.com. If you haven't already signed up for our email subscription, we would love to have you join the BDA community. Until next time, take care.